As mentioned in the previous recording, we're currently looking at Unit 3 and we are looking at Chapter 5 today. In the previous recording we looked at Chapter 3, so we're going to look at Chapter 5. Chapter 5 is the longer chapter of this unit, whereas Chapter 10 is just a short summary or example of actually sequencing. So we're going to look at the tendering procedures and how it usually works. So the book starts off with the first obligation whenever you're a contractor is to get a job. The first objective is to find a job, and this usually takes a bit of experience. It's a catch-22. It's usually like finding your first work opportunity, where everyone asks that you have to have work experience. But how do you get work experience without ever gotten the opportunity to actually work? So it is almost that type of situation whenever you start out with your own company. But usually how it works is you do have some experience that you take with from wherever you started out working, etc., and you kind of build it up and so on. So your pre-tender planning is done under the following headings. So the first thing is that you need to establish some contract leads. So as soon as you start building up a relationship with consultants, maybe a QS or architect or engineers or so, you will get some leads on whether a tender is going out or whether they're currently planning for a tender that's going out or so. Then you have to make sure about your pre-tender qualifications. Do you adhere to all of the requirements set out in the tender? That would be like, for instance, do you have the right CIDB grading? Have you worked on civil work before, civil projects? Have you worked on a building project before? That type of pre-qualifications, tax certificates, etc. Is your company registered? And so forth. So, and then the tendering process. You need to make sure that you understand the tendering process, that usually there is a compulsory site meeting or site briefing. So if you do not attend those compulsory site briefings, you will not be eligible for the tender. So those are the things that you need to understand. And then you have to understand the traditional competitive tendering. That's the one that we're going to focus on mostly in this course, where you have your traditional system, where like mentioned in the previous lecture, you have your consultants on the one side and a contractor on the other. You're invited to a tender, you get the tender document, you complete it, and you send it back. So that is the one that we're going to focus on mostly. So establishing your contract lead. So Cook and Williams just highlights a couple of things that you need to have a look at. So you've got your marketing approach. How are you going to approach your marketing? You have, while taking that into account, you have tendering cost money. So your tender documents usually entails buying the tender document from whoever sets out the tender. And then you have to assess the risks and profit potential on each project. Is the effort worthwhile putting in a tender, getting the tender documentation? Are you what will this project mean to you? It doesn't help that you tender on small on two smaller projects and you have a big fleet of resources that you have to keep going. So you have to make sure that you've got the right focus whenever you go out and search for your tenders. Project criteria have to be set. Some examples are your project type. For instance, you're just going to focus on a certain type of project, for instance building, or are you a specialist in refurbishment work, or what? Okay, and then you've got your project size. What size of projects will you be focusing on? When you first start out, you usually start out smaller because the risk is a bit smaller, and then as you progress, you can go into larger projects. Then you've got your contractual arrangements. Do you have everything that is necessary? Is your company registered? Do you have the necessary tax clearance certificates? All of that information. Form of contract and contract terms. Are you willing to actually sign contracts that will ask you to commit to certain responsibilities? Like, for instance, if you get onto site, will you have your health and safety file in place? Will you appoint a health and safety officer on your site? That type of things. Okay, and then you have to establish which location are you going to have your is going to be your focus area. Okay, and then as a closing note, unfortunately, tender submissions does take a lot of time and effort to submit a good tender. So obviously, it depends on how busy you are. Usually, if you're not that busy, then you can submit better tenders. So you go up and down um, um, up streams like that. Like sometimes during a year you might have a lot of tenders on your table, and then it might quieten down later on, or you might have a big portfolio. Your horizon for income is up to 3 years or so. In the current situation that we've got in the country, the horizon for many companies isn't that far into the future. So yeah, that's just items that you just have to take in consideration whenever you look at the tender process. Then your pre-tender qualifications, you have to think about these items. I've touched on them already. So you've this is now everything except your price. So general contracts will have specifications with general criteria. Are you a building contractor or are you a civil contractor? Are you located in the vicinity? Are you a local-based company, which many firms do require? What's your company details? Have you ever completed similar projects? Technical expertise, plant. What plant do you have available? So all that type of information is asked during the tender process that's evaluated by the client. Okay, so the main thing is to prove that during your tender process is to prove that you have the competence and past experience to actually do this work. You do have the resources to complete this project as well. You have to prove that you have a good and sound organization and structure in your company to actually deal with all of the procurement of materials. You do have the necessary cash flow to actually carry this project up to completion. And then in many tender documents, your current commitments is also asked for. So sometimes it might be neck and neck between you and another company, and but it might be a situation of you are a bit overcommitted at this stage, so you might not be able to do the work now in the next few months. So then it would be better for the client to rather give it to someone that doesn't have that much work. This is usually a difficult thing to assess if you're on the consultant side. What you try and do from the consultant side, obviously the contractor will say that he does have the capacity, although you will have to check whether that is the truth or not. So a bit of background checks and to phone around a little and find out. If you're in a small community, like for instance in Bloemfontein, it is easy to know what the commitments are of certain contractors also, if you've built up a bit of a relationship with them. And then you've got details of insurances. Do you have the necessary insurance in place? Is your BE status in place? Your CIDB grading? All of those technical items. Then we look at the standard tender evaluation methods. So according to the CIDB, there's a couple of tender processes that when looking at tenders. So you've got method 1, which looks at the price and preference. And then we've got method 2, which looks at functionality, price, and preference. So in short, and the summary is basically if it's price and preference, it's only your price and then your BE status. When it's your method 2, which this is the one that I've been involved in most, you have your functionality and then you've got your price and preference. So your functionality is like your first stage of evaluation. That's basically looking at, does this contractor have the necessary experience, etc., etc. And then if they don't adhere to that, then they're thrown out. If they do adhere to that, then you evaluate it on price and preference. Then you score points for that. So just looking at the descriptions here, you score tender evaluation points on price, so you score points on that. You score points on your BE contribution, and you add point score for price and BE. So basically you just score your tender document. So these days everything about over 5 million is 80-20, so or above a million, I apologize. So 80-20, so 20% of your point score will be allocated accordingly according to your BE status, and then the rest 80% will be allocated towards your price. And then there's a scorecard that's also given by the CIDB, and then the tender is evaluated according to that. And then method 2, you've got your score functionality, rejection all tenders that fail to score the minimum number of points for functionality. So that's what I explained. You evaluate this, the tenders according to past experience, and you give them a score. They have to get over a specified score to be evaluated further. And those that do score higher than those that required mark will be evaluated further on the following points. No tender must be regarded as an acceptable tender if it fails to achieve the minimum qualifying score for functionality. Yeah, okay, so that just goes hand in hand with 1. Then the tenders that have achieved the minimum qualification score for functionality must be evaluated further in terms of the preference points system prescribed in paragraphs 4 and 5 below. So that is, in short, then what was explained here. Okay, so just be mindful of that. Then estimating involves the following. So your estimator will usually make inquiries to suppliers and cost materials. As soon as they receive their tender documents, they will start inquiring about the suppliers and materials. They will ask quotations from subcontractors. They will look at labor cost. Has the current system updated or so? They might get costs from labor only contractors. And then they price the items in the BOQ. Obviously they do receive the items back, and I think there's another slide that we'll just talk about that. Planning the timescale for the project. This is mainly for the P's and G's to be able to price that. So for instance, if you've got a crane on site, how long will that crane be on site? So the cranes are usually charged per day, and the establishment cost, and then the cost per day is usually calculated on top of that. So you need to get a realistic time scale on calculating your P's and G's. How long will your insurances be running on the project? How long will you have containers on site, etc. Then pricing the cost of running the project on site is calculated, producing a summary of the tender. Then the estimator produce a summary that is sent to tender directors or the directors of the company, depending on how your company is structured. Then just how the tender process usually works within a small, medium-sized company. You've got your managing director, and you have your estimators on the one side, your contract directors on the one side, and your commercial manager on the other side. So this is your commercial managers are usually the implementation side of the company, where you have your clerical staff and so on, looking at your office admin, if you want to call it that. And then you have your estimator, surveyor, and an estimator maybe underneath him. So he's usually involved with the BOQ and so on. Whereas your contracts director will have your contract managers, and underneath him they will have the contract managers or construction managers on site. So your estimators usually do the bill section, and your contracts director or your contracts manager usually completes the tenders that will be sent to the managing director for final sign-off. Okay, and then your large companies will usually have an estimating department, contracts department, planning division, and then administration, your commercial manager and clerical staff working with the financial side or the admin side of the company. And then you might have a regional director here at the top. So you've got your chief estimator, and then your senior estimator, and then you've got a buyer. The buyers are not an estimator, but they usually do the actual buying from suppliers and so on. They are the people that negotiate the best prices from suppliers. So usually your buyer might supply your senior estimator with some information, but the actual order to go and packaging material to be ordered for a specific site goes through a buyer. So the buyer is not necessarily a QS. It might be a financial manager, someone from like an accountant or so, which usually handles that. And the reason for having a buyer is because they buy material not only for one site. So they're not working on a project site, they're working on multiple purchases from a single supplier or another supplier or so. So they usually negotiate the best prices. And then you've got maybe a team of estimators below, and then your chief estimator will be responsible for pricing of your tender documents. Then you've got your contracts manager. He's responsible for the planning, scheduling, and usually your requirements like your tax clearance certificate, completing the tender documentation, excluding the BOQ, etc. And then you've got your planning division, and this is the department that usually looks at tenders that's coming out. They would give that through to the regional director also, or to whoever needs to complete the tenders. They will identify potential tenders, and they will also plan according to the implementation of those projects. So it's the planning division is in many cases project managers, basically looking at only that section of keeping the company busy. How busy are we? What's our horizon for our income, our commitments, and so on? We need to get more tenders in, so we're searching for more tenders, etc., etc. They look at tender planning, and then the contracts planning. Who's going to complete what, by what time? Is there a compulsory site meeting that has to be attended, etc. Okay, then we get into our principal directors tendering procedures, and this is a very important slide to look at, table 5.1. So you've got your managing director, your estimator, estimating surveying director and your contracts manager, and you will see that you've got a decision to tender at the top of all of these items. So your managing director usually organizes everyone to do a bid or tender document if they need to. They monitor the process and the progress, and a tender adjudication and risk assessment. He assesses, or through the contracts manager or whoever he assigns to actually look at those items, he will assign and ultimately take responsibility for the risk. Do we have the necessary PI insurance for taking on this project or not? And then he analyzes the tender performance. Did we do well in the tender document? Did everyone supply him with the necessary information to make a good decision on whether we're going to submit this tender or not? And then we've got the estimating surveyor. He also takes the decision whether we can tender for this project. Site visit and report. So he visits the site. Inquiries to the subcontractors and suppliers, tender method statements, build up estimates, build up the contract preliminaries, and tender adjudication risk assessment also falls underneath his portfolio, and analysis of the tender performance on the costing side. Okay, so you will see that this is a function that can be divided into different sections depending on how the organization is structured. Okay. Then you've got your contract manager or director. He also visits the site or arranges that someone competent visits the site. So there's a bit of coordination between him and the estimator, who also needs information from them. Advice on construction methods. Okay, so he's looking at the practical side of it. Advice on plant and material and pre-tender program, response to pre-tender health and safety plan. Okay, so he looks at all of these items, the technical items of the site. And so he does give a lot of information to the estimator. Okay, then again, he looks at the tender adjudication and risk assessment and does an analysis on the tender performance. Okay, then you've got the program of tender activities. So here you've got your design and build contract. So I'm just going to brush through this one. So you've got your documentation that you receive. So this is your tender document for that, the tender launch meeting. Okay, explaining the site visit, ground investigation. Then if all of the contractors that's going to tender on this project has to do a design development. Okay, so you might have an initial site visit, but you might want to visit the site again to get more information. Then you've got your client brief mid-tender. That's basically where you as a contractor give feedback on how the design is going. And then you prepare your tender draft and the quantities, and then you divide your project into different packages, and you build up your estimate according to that. Then you've got your pre-tender program, then the build-up of prelims is done, and your estimate summary is compiled, and your tender settlement, and prepare your submission document on which the client then evaluates your tender that you have submitted, whether that it will work or not. So just be mindful, this is your design and build contract. So the other examples is given in your book, so please just have a look at that. Make sure that you go through that. Okay, traditional competitive tenders. So this is the one that we're going to focus on most. So you've got your, it is divided into the following stages: your decision to tender, pre-tender arrangements, your site visit report, tender inquiries and subcontractors, build-up of your estimate, pre-tender method statement, and preparation of pre-tender program, build-up of your contract preliminaries, and management adjudication of your estimate, analysis of your submitted tender document. So I've discussed most of these items already, especially in table 1.5. It's highlighted. And then in your program, your activities, this is more or less how that is scheduled. So you will receive your tender documents. You've got your launch meeting, your site visit, um, director, commercial manager, estimator, buyer, planner, contracts manager. This meeting is usually when you ask all your questions. What is required? Where is the site located? That type of thing. Then you as directors take a decision whether you're going to tender on this project or not. Then you've got your site visit report. So whoever has to visit the site can visit the site, whether it's the QS or the contracts manager or whoever. And then you've got your pre-tender meeting. So this is usually your commercial or your compulsory meeting where the client, oh no, my apologies, this is your internal meeting. I just got mixed up. So your tender launch meeting is our tender briefing meeting, basically. So your internal pre-tender meeting is where you sit around the table, discuss who's going to do what, and so forth. Okay, then you've got your inquiries to suppliers and subcontractors. Why this can start early here already. You can start asking your suppliers whether they are whether they can actually help you on this tender document. So you might establish your crucial subcontractors, whether they can get involved, because it will influence your decision whether you're going to tender or not. Okay, then you've got your rate build-ups as your information comes in. You've got your method statements that's produced as you go along, and your pre-tender program is developed. Your prelims is then built up based on this, and then your estimated summary is compiled, and then you've got your tenders adjudication meeting where everyone sits around the table, director, manager, estimator, and so on, to discuss the tender, whether everything is included, anything that was maybe flagged or so, and then the director signs it off and it is submitted. Okay. So the decision to tender is always a very important thing, especially if you are short-handed and you don't have a lot of capacity and you need to prioritize on what needs to be done. So the price should be influenced by the risk and market factors. So you have to assess whether you want to tender on this project. Is it worth the risk or not? And then your circumstances may change and should be evaluated during the adjudication process. And then you can have a look at the following checklist, which is quite handy whenever you do assess whether you're going to tender on this project or not. Do you have the necessary capital? What's the tender policy? What type of job? Availability of resources, location. I've basically looked at this already. And just make sure that you do read through this information, that you've covered all of the points, and know what is expected. It's quite handy also whenever you do get into practice to go through this list each time. So your pre-tender arrangements, the main responsibility lies with the estimator together with the contracts manager. Those are the two people that make the big decisions on a tender. The estimator produces the tasks and includes the receipt of the document, registering the number. If you've got a numbering system, if you've got a lot of tenders, I remember when I worked for a big large consultant firm, we used to number our tenders because you might do anything up to 50 tenders within a month. I think that was the highest that we had. Yeah, it was quite busy, and then you do lose track of the number of tenders that goes in. So usually numbering those tenders does pay off whenever searching for tender numbers or so. And then setting up this decision to tender meeting, the QS usually also calls meetings to clarify working procedures, who's going to do what, how does this actually work, how do I price this, etc., etc. Right, distributing documentation within the team for clarification or pricing. Maybe there's an electrical side, so the company might have an electrical um, division that will be able to price the electrical side much better than he would. Then arranging review meetings during the tender and just checking how's it going, are we still going to meet the deadline, and so on. Then arranging adjudication meeting and submitting the final bid. So yes, standard items that we've already discussed. Then just to look at your site visit, very important thing. If you can always try and visit the site, because you do get a lot of insight of going to site, establishing whether you can maybe get a competitive edge. A good example would be if you know the area and you can see on site, but look, there's some rocky outcrops here. It might be that the hard rock is a little bit more than what's measured in the BOQ, so you might load that item slightly and maybe lower another rate elsewhere in the BOQ, so that you might come in at a lower rate. But then in the end, when you do your remeasurement, you can actually make up that cost. So those are the things that you pick up on site. So you need to look at the following items. So your access to the site. Do you have accessibility to the site? If you've got a junior person that might visit the site, you won't necessarily look at those items where the access to site might be a challenge. Access restrictions. Will plant actually be able to get into the site, or do you have to get a crane to lift the plant into the site, which will add a lot of cost to your project? How does the topography look? Is it quite a slopey site? Waste disposal. Is there a dump site nearby that you can actually take your plant or your dump material? Is there supplies for your material nearby or so? And then you've got your site security. Do you have to spend a lot of money on your site security? Is it maybe located within the Joburg CBD? Is it maybe located somewhere where the crime rate isn't that high? So obviously that will influence your security tariff that you will have. Is it located on a mine? Is it located in a red zone or orange zone? A green zone maybe on the mine, which will also influence how you price your P's and G's. Adjustment of your building and services, or adjacent buildings. Do you have to do shoring, or when you do excavations, lateral support for your basements, etc., etc. Very important to look at that. Then I just added the soil conditions that you might look at. Is there maybe any other risks that you can see? Like for instance, is there a school nearby that might be a hazard for children maybe falling into excavations? What type of shoring barricades do you have to use on site? So you can have a look at on page 90 for the pro forma checklist for your site report. Then your tender inquiries to subcontractors. So usually your estimator will send out the sections that he can identify quickly that he can send to subcontractors to get feedback as soon as possible from them. So you've got your estimate that takes a BOQ. Okay, that's what I just said. And then you should be careful to know that each contractor includes in his price and that there's no duplication. So for instance, do that contractor include additional P's and G's or contingencies, or maybe does he allow for site establishment, which is not necessarily necessary for him to include, because you've got that included in your tender price as contractor already. So you need to clarify what's included in it. Does it only include the supply of the material? Or does it include this installation of it as well? Items are usually split into trades. Yeah, so that's, you should know that by now. And subletting should also be kept in mind. Whether items can maybe be subcontracted to other areas, to other contractors. If you see that you do not have capacity, you might ask other subcontractors to assist with that. Or if that subcontractor is too busy, he can maybe ask the assistance from another subcontractor. Then the suppliers, the same thing, principle applies to that. He sends out his BOQ for the material rates to suppliers as soon as possible. Then the material is supplied in different units that it's included in the BOQ. So you need to take that into consideration. So for instance, if you ordering copper pipes for your plumbing installation, they will give you a rate per 3-meter sections, usually in how they are delivered. So you need to take that into account. So it has to be reverted back to the unit that was measured in the BOQ. Then you add your profit, wastage, etc. on top of that. Okay, so build-up of your estimate. The estimate can involve more than just one estimator, planners, and other staff with assistance from the buyer in instances. So you've got the following processes that's usually involved with your actual rate build-up. So the previous slide looked at gathering the information. Now you need to interpret that information and build up your rates for labor, pricing, and dividing your items that you received into the units for the bills, analyze the quotations, build up your contract preliminaries, and preparation of your tender summary, attending tender adjudication meetings, etc., to get feedback on whether you are in the ballpark with your tender or not, to learn from that. So building up of your estimate. Also a very important slide to know is your labor. So you've got your the sources of estimating data. So your accuracy of your rate buildups is influenced by the experience of your estimator, labor constraints. How much labor do you have? Do you have to outsource other labor to assist you to actually get the numbers on site? Labor outputs provided by the subcontractors, will they be able to actually do the work within the allotted time? And then feedback data from company information. So the company information is usually the rates per hour for the labor that you're going to use on site. Then you've got your output obtained from price books, so previous tenders, etc. Work study observations. Maybe you will, if you've got a new resource or new bricklayer that you've got on site, you might go and look at a project where he is currently working, and you can assess whether he can actually do this work within this allotted time or so. So it all comes down to experience, basically. Then you've got your materials, you've got your current quotations from suppliers, your previous quotations, if you've maybe done a tender beforehand or you're currently busy with a project, you can use that rates on your tender again. Then manufacturing price lists. So you can get a lot of information maybe from a price list of suppliers. Published material prices. On the internet, you can get quite a lot of information these days if you need to do an estimate, although it's quite risky because most of the prices on the internet is usually special rates that's given, and not necessarily the actual rate whenever you are going to buy that material. So it's best to get actual quotations from suppliers. And then you start building up a material database. That's very handy whenever you do tenders, because it just makes the estimation process quicker whenever you have a nice database set up. Then you look at your plant. The experience of the estimator is very important with your plant because it's all about operation time and cost whenever you are calculating your plant. So feedback data from your company information, random plant outputs from site. So you look at what the plant can actually produce, how much cubic meters can be excavated by this excavator with this operator working on it. And then you've got your subcontractor quotations that will also assist with that, and manufacturer of output data from plant material. Your plant, your schedule and your schedule is very important for your plant calculation, because again your plant is divided into a rate per hour or so, which is then converted into and then compared to your schedule on how long you will need that specific excavator on your site. So on this project, it will maybe be needed for an hour. It has a cost of 6,000 rand per day, for depending on the size of the excavator. And then you can calculate, okay, this will be the cost of excavating this section. Obviously, you will need to take into account, you might need some labor to clear it out, the excavations and cleaning and leveling it. Does that excavated material is it staying on site? Is it stockpiled? Is it carted away? That type of thing has to be taken into account. Okay, so your pre-tender method statements. So just take note, we're going to look at pre-tender method statements, and we're going to look at our pre-construction method statements and our construction method statements. So now we're just looking at our pre-tender method statements. So in our in chapter 10, we've got a very simple example of how a pre-method statement might look. So we'll have a look at that. So the short and long of the pre-method statement, it outlines the sequence of your method of construction, and the pre-tender program is compiled from this. The preliminaries are calculated from the program, and the civil works put more emphasis on the method statements because the measurements is less detailed than buildings. So the point that I just wanted to make here is, if you're working on civil or SANS measurement BOQs, the detail of the descriptions in your actual BOQ will be different than your standard system that you will get. So you will have to spend a bit more time on actually measuring some of the work yourself as a contractor. Okay, so preparation of pre-tender program. The pre-tender program highlights your risk. It allows the contractor to price his preliminaries. The main question is, can it be done within the time? If it can't, then you can qualify it in your tender document. If it's not allowed that you can qualify it, you have to look at other methods to mitigate that. Maybe appointing more resources, getting in a subcontractor also. So the main thing is you need to see whether the time period is actually realistic. The program is usually a tender requirement. And finally, the bar chart is usually the best way to show the program visually. Okay, the build-up of your contract preliminaries. So preliminaries allows for items that cannot reasonably be priced in the measured items. For instance, the cranes that I've spoken about. Your preliminaries usually has time items, fixed items, and value-based items. So your time items might be your insurance, your upkeep of offices, site offices. Then you might have a fixed rate of site establishment, enclosing your site, and then the establishment and enclosing of your site. So your P's and G's might be paid out maybe according to this item has been completed, and now you can get the money in your payment certificate. Whereas time related items are items that paid as the project's time goes by. So it doesn't really matter whether those items are done or not, but there's a certain amount according to the items that you priced that is paid out according to time. And then your value-based items is the items that's paid out according to the amount of work that you've done on site. So if your payment certificates goes up to maybe you get a payout of 50, you're now at 50% of your payment certificate values, you can get 50% of your value-based preliminary items. So just be mindful of that. Then the preliminary checklist may comprise the following: your employees' requirements, your contractors' management and staffing, site accommodation costs, attendance on subcontractors, facilities and services, temporary works, mechanical plant, and non-mechanical plant. So these are just some items that your client might request from you to get clarification on. Management and adjudication of your estimate. The estimator presents the tender documents to the contractor for his director for his consideration. The director will ask the following questions: is the estimate accurate? Does it make sense? The cost that that is given to him. Have the items been priced sensibly? Are the subcontractor prices achievable? Is the pre-tender program realistic? Okay, and then he will either agree with the price or increase or reduce it, make some amendments. A 2-envelope system may be required by the client, one for quality and one for cost. So we'll still get into that a little bit. And then your tender performance, there's two sides of it. So you can either look at your tender evaluation or tender submissions. Some contractors like to get very much detail on how he did with his tender submissions. Where did he go wrong? How does it compare? And others might see that as a bit of a waste of time, and rather focus on the next tender than trying to analyze the previous one. Obviously, as you get experience, that will change in due course. So when you start out, you try and find out where did I go wrong, and so on. And if you get experience, you get confidence, and you kind of get an idea quicker where you went wrong if you did not win the tender also. So that is more or less how the tender process goes. Yeah, as usual, if there's any questions, you're more than welcome to contact me. Thanks, guys. Bye.